World of Warcraft has hundreds of thousands of items, but only a handful have become genuinely mythological. Transmogs so rare that even the most obsessive collectors have never seen them drop. Today, I'm breaking down the rarest transmogs in WoW and everything that makes them nearly impossible to get, starting with a hat that costs more than most players will ever earn. Miner's Hat of the Deep. This helmet has a drop rate of 0.01%. Not 1%, not 0.1%, but 0.01%. That means for every 10,000 kills, you might see it once. And it doesn't drop from a raid boss or a world event. It drops from random trash mobs inside Uldaman. Just regular, forgettable enemies wandering around a dungeon that nobody has willingly entered since 2006. But here's where it gets worse. When Cataclysm launched, Blizzard overhauled Uldaman's mob levels and dungeon structure. The original drop conditions were essentially wiped out. So if you started playing after Cataclysm, the version of Uldaman you know barely resembles the one where this hat could actually drop at a functional rate. And what does this impossibly rare item actually look like? It turns your character into a kobold. Candle on the head and everything. You could spend months grinding the same dungeon over and over and your reward is looking like one of those little creatures that screams you, "No take candle in Elwyn Forest." There is no trick to getting this thing. No bonus rolls, no bad luck protection, no deterministic path. You run Uldaman, you kill trash, and you pray. Community documented prices sit around 3.7 million gold on North American servers because serious collectors have done the math and decided that spending a fortune is more rational than farming it themselves. Nobody knows if this was intentional. Some players think the drop rate was a developer joke that shipped and never got corrected. Others believe it's a legacy bug that Blizzard simply forgot about. Either way, it has never been patched, adjusted, or acknowledged, but if a single helmet with a candle on it sounds extreme, wait until you hear what it costs to get an entire armor set that was deleted from the game for over a decade. Tier 3 sets. Tier 3 armor is some of the most iconic gear ever designed in World of Warcraft. The Dreadnought set, the Plagueheart raiment, Frostfire regalia. These sets defined what endgame looked like in vanilla, and for over a decade they were completely gone. When Naxxramas moved to Northrend in Wrath of the Lich King, the original Tier 3 tokens stopped dropping. Just like that, some of the best looking armor in the game vanished from existence. But here's where it gets interesting. Blizzard didn't just forget about them. In patch 10.1.5 during Dragonflight, they finally brought Tier 3 back. Players lost their minds. And then they saw how you actually get it, because Blizzard didn't just slap these sets back into a raid, they built one of the most deliberately punishing acquisition systems the game has ever seen. To craft Tier 3, you need ancient secrets from a revamped version of Naxxramas, Stratholme Holy Waters, Dark Runes, and Scourge Stones. Already sounds like a lot, right? That's just the beginning. To unlock the actual crafting recipes, you need to buy randomized slime cover scrolls that pull from a pool of 41 different patterns, so you can dump hundreds of thousands of gold into scrolls and still not unlock the one recipe you need. It's a slot machine wearing a crafting system's clothes, but the part that genuinely sounds like a joke is the purification step. Once you craft a cursed piece of Tier 3, you need another player to purify it for you. Specifically, a crafter who holds the Drop Dead Gorgeous achievement. And how do you earn that achievement? By completing a full Tier 3 set. So the only people who can help you finish your set are people who already finished theirs. Read that again if you need to. The total cost for a full set sits around 2.8 million gold in vendor materials alone. That's before you factor in the randomized recipe grind, the material farming, and whatever the crafter charges you for their time. The community reaction has been exactly what you'd expect. Half the player base celebrated the return of legendary armor. The other half called it a pay-to-win transmog system disguised as nostalgia content. And honestly, both sides have a point, but at least Tier 3 is technically obtainable now. The next item on this list hasn't been that lucky. Corrupted Ashbringer. Few weapons in World of Warcraft carry the kind of weight that the Corrupted Ashbringer does. This was the blade of Alexandros Mograine, the weapon that essentially kickstarted the entire Death Knight storyline, and it dropped from the Four Horsemen in vanilla Naxxramas. But here's where it gets complicated. When patch 3.0.2 hit and Naxxramas was relocated to Northrend, the original Corrupted Ashbringer vanished from the loot table permanently. Gone. No warning, no replacement, no apology, and the sword wasn't just a stat stick. Equipping it triggered one of the most elaborate scripted events the game has ever seen. Your character's appearance literally darkened. Argent Dawn NPCs turned hostile toward you. Scarlet Crusade members, the faction you'd been slaughtering for levels suddenly treated you like a friend, and the ghost of Alexandros Migraine himself would whisper one of 12 unique phrases directly to the wielder. Nothing else in the game has ever done anything like that, before or since, but here's the part that kills me. For Retribution paladins who want a corrupted Ashbringer transmog today, the path to getting one involves fishing. Specifically, you need to track down Nat Pagel's fishing books, grab the head of Nefarian from Blackwing Lair, and then park yourself in Dire Maul and start casting your line for the Shard of Darkness. A weapon that once made entire factions bow to you now requires a fishing rod and a lot of patience, and that patience varies wildly. Some players have reported snagging the Shard of Darkness in about 40 minutes. Others have documented casting 4,542 times before it finally dropped. That's not a typo. 4,542 casts, sitting in Dire Maul, fishing for a corrupted holy sword. The entire questline bounces you through Blackwing Lair, Dire Maul, and Alterac Valley, making it one of the most elaborate hidden artifact appearance chains from Legion. The community still debates whether Blizzard silently buffed the Shard of Darkness drop rate at some point, or whether the gap between a 40-minute catch and a 4,542 cast nightmare is just pure RNG being itself. Nobody has a definitive answer, which feels oddly fitting for a weapon called the Corrupted Ashbringer. Even getting the transmog version is shrouded in mystery, but at least this one is technically still obtainable. The next item on our list, it requires you to kill a specific raid boss over and over with a drop rate so low it borders on cruelty. The first Satyr's Spalders. Some rare transmogs have complicated stories behind them, lost questlines, removed dungeons, entire systems that got deleted overnight. This one doesn't. The first Satyr's Spalders is just a boss drop. You kill Xavius in the Emerald Nightmare and you pray. That's the whole strategy, that's the whole game. But here's the thing, prayer doesn't go very far when the drop rate sits at roughly 0.26 to 0.3%. That translates to one drop for every 300 to 400 kills, and that number assumes you're even eligible to use the item because the Spalders are leather shoulders, restricted to druids, rogues, monks, and demon hunters. Every other class, including hunters and shamans, can kill Xavius, see the drop, and be unable to loot it. The item exists, it taunts you, but it will never be yours. And for the people who actually can wear mail, it barely gets better. Players have documented farming Xavius over 100 times without seeing a single drop. We're talking multiple years of weekly clears across multiple characters, logging in every reset, killing the same Nightmare Lord, opening the same empty loot window, and walking away with nothing. There's no bad luck protection, no pity timer ticking in the background, just pure unfiltered randomness deciding whether this is your week or not. Now, there is technically an alternative route. During Legion, players could funnel veiled Argunite currency into shoulder-specific tokens through the Argus vendor system, which at least guaranteed the token would convert into a shoulder piece. But the time investment to grind that currency was massive, and you were still rolling the dice on which shoulders you actually received, so why do people bother? Because the shoulders look incredible. Large sweeping spikes with a demonic aesthetic that genuinely stands out in a game full of oversized pauldrons. Blizzard designed these as a collector's grail, not a practical piece of raid gear, and the community knows it. This is a transmog first item with a transmog last drop rate, but at least the first Satyr's Spalders actually exist on a loot table you can access. The next item on this list makes this grind look casual by comparison. Tusks of Manaroth. You can't talk about rare transmog without eventually landing here. The Tusks of Manaroth are the single most coveted plate shoulders in World of Warcraft, and it's not particularly close. These are the literal tusks ripped from the skull of a demon lord, strapped to your character's shoulders like a trophy. And Blizzard knows exactly what they have. They drop from Garrosh Hellscream in Siege of Orgrimmar on heroic or mythic difficulty at roughly a 0.3% drop rate. That means for every 300 kills, you can statistically expect to see them once. But here's where it gets interesting, because unlike some of the other nightmares on this list, Blizzard has actually made this grind more bearable over time. During Dragonflight, they added a direct skip straight to Garrosh and lifted the old boss reset restrictions. That was a massive quality of life change. Suddenly, players could run the encounter multiple times per character per week instead of slogging through the entire raid for a single shot. The optimal strategy now involves maintaining multiple plate characters at level 50 or higher, parking them near the raid entrance, and running both heroic and mythic each week to double your attempts per character. Now, you might be thinking about bonus roll tokens. Technically, you can grab them from the Shrine of Two Moons or Shrine of Seven Stars, but farming the lesser charms of good fortune from the Timeless Isle to fuel those tokens is so painfully painfully inefficient that the community has basically agreed it's not worth your time. Your weekly lockouts across multiple characters will do more heavy lifting than bonus rolls ever could, but even with a perfectly optimized multi-character farm, you should realistically expect years before probability catches up with you. That's not an exaggeration. Years. And there's a fun community theory about why Blizzard has never buffed this drop rate. Some players argue that the tusks carry too much lore weight. You're wearing pieces of Manaroth on your shoulders, the demon whose blood corrupted the entire orc race. That's not just a cosmetic, that's a statement. The theory goes that Blizzard intentionally treats these shoulders as legendary tier through artificial scarcity because if everyone had them, the lore power disappears. Whether that's true or just copium from exhausted farmers is up for debate, but it's hard to argue with the logic. The good news is that unlike some transmogs on this list, the tusks have a visible finish line. It might be years away, but every kill brings you mathematically closer, which is more than you can say for what's coming next. Pauldrons of Zakul. Here's the thing about drop rates. A 0.2% chance sounds brutal on its own, and it is, but the Pauldrons of Zakul aren't just rare because of the number. They're rare because of what it costs you every single time you roll those dice. These plate shoulders drop from Zakul, one of the final bosses in the Eternal Palace raid from Battle for Azeroth. And unlike nearly every other legacy raid people farm for Transmog, the Eternal Palace never received a raid skip. There's no shortcut, there's no teleport to the end. Every single attempt means clearing through the earlier bosses first, fighting your way through an entire underwater raid instance just to reach Zakul and pray that this is the run. Each farming attempt takes roughly 30 minutes to an hour depending on your class and gear. Think about what that actually means. If you're farming a boss with a 1% drop in a raid where you can skip straight to the encounter, you pull the slot machine lever every few minutes. With Zakul, you're walking 45 minutes to the casino before you're even allowed to touch the machine. Then you pull the lever once, get nothing, walk home, and do it all over again next week. But here's where the math gets genuinely painful. After 100 farming attempts, your cumulative probability of having seen the shoulders drop at least once is still below 50%, and 100 attempts at 30 to 60 minutes each represents 50 to 100 real hours of active gameplay. Not AFK time, not background farming, actual raid clearing, boss killing, loot checking, soul crushing hours. The shoulders themselves are plate restricted, so only warriors, paladins, and death knights can even use them. That's a narrower eligible pool than most rare drops, which does mean less competition if you're running with a group. But it also means fewer characters per account that can farm them efficiently. The community genuinely loves the visual design of these shoulders. They look incredible and they're instantly recognizable. But the criticism isn't about the drop rate alone, it's about the combination of an absurdly low drop rate with zero quality of life improvements to the farming process. Players aren't just gambling against RNG, they're paying a 30 to 60 minute entry fee for every single attempt, indefinitely with no guarantee they'll ever see a return. That time per attempt ratio is what makes Zakul's shoulders stand apart from other rare farms. And yet, as punishing as that grind is, at least you know the item exists in the loot table. The next entry on this list has a drop rate so microscopic that some players genuinely question whether it's even real. Tayshaluk. Tayshaluk is the kind of farm that tricks you into thinking it'll be easy, and that's exactly what makes it so painful. Here's the setup. This two-handed sword drops from Agrimar and Antares the Burning Throne with a drop rate hovering around 0.10% to 0.12%. That translates to roughly one drop for every 800 to 1000 kills. Death Knights, Hunters, Paladins, and Warriors can all use it, so you'd think spreading the farm across multiple characters would help. It barely does. When the drop rate is that low, adding a few extra weekly attempts is like trying to empty an ocean with a slightly bigger bucket. But here's where Tayshaluk plays mind games with you. The farming method itself is incredibly simple. You queue into Raid Finder difficulty, which lets you access Agrimar directly without clearing a single earlier boss. Walk in, kill him, walk out. All four difficulties, Raid Finder, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic, can drop the sword, so dedicated farmers can squeeze multiple attempts per character per week across different lockouts. On paper, this is one of the most time-efficient rare farms in the entire game, and it still won't drop. That's the cruel irony of Tayshaluk. There's no complex questline gating you, no prerequisite reputation grind, no multi-step system to optimize, you kill the boss. You check your loot, you see nothing. You do it again next week. There is zero strategic depth to this farm. No trick, no shortcut, no hidden method that the community discovered to boost your chances. It's just you, Agrimar, and the cold mathematics of probability. But here's the part that genuinely hurts to think about. Players have documented running Agrimar 25 to 30 times per week across multiple characters and difficulties for an entire year without seeing a single Taishalak drop. That's over 1,200 kills with nothing to show for it. You can do everything right, maximize every lockout, run every difficulty, maintain a full roster of eligible characters, and the sword simply refuses to exist for you. The boss dies in seconds, the run takes minutes, and somehow those minutes add up to months and then years of absolutely nothing. That's what separates Taishalak from farms that feel impossible because they're complicated. This one feels impossible because it's simple. You understand exactly what you need to do. You execute it flawlessly every single week, and the game just says no. But if Taishalak's drop rate sounds rough, wait until you hear about the weapon that drops from the very next boss in the same raid, Drace. Spithe of the Unmaker. Compared to everything else on this list, a 1% drop rate sounds almost generous. Almost. Because in practice, 1% still means you can farm Argus the Unmaker and Antares every single week for over a year and walk away empty-handed. And thousands of players did exactly that. But here's where the Scythe gets interesting. It's not just one weapon, there are two distinct color variations. The blue version can drop from any difficulty, normal through mythic, giving you multiple shots per week. The red version though, that's mythic only, and that distinction matters more than you'd think because it created a built-in hierarchy among collectors, and getting the blue scythe was hard. Getting the red one was a statement. Now, the eligible class list is actually pretty wide for a weapon this rare. Paladins, warriors, druids, death knights, hunters, and monks could all use it, but that wider pool is a double-edged sword because it means more players are competing for the same drop on every single kill. More demand, same brutal 1% chance. For years, that was the entire story. You killed Argus, you prayed to the loot gods, and you almost certainly got nothing, but then Legion Remix happened, and Blizzard did something genuinely surprising. They added a vendor system that let players purchase the scythe using bronze currency and cosmic souls livers. For the first time ever, there was a guaranteed finish line. You still had to defeat Argus the Unmaker multiple times to accumulate enough currency, so it wasn't free by any stretch, but the RNG element was gone. You could see the progress bar filling up, and you knew the weapon was coming. Yet the community response was fascinating. You'd expect resentment from players who spent years farming the old way, but the overwhelming reaction was relief. People were just happy the nightmare was over, and Blizzard went one step further. They introduced a staff transmog version during Legion Remix that opened the aesthetic up to mages, priests, warlocks, shamans, and evokers. Classes that previously had zero path to the scythe's appearance could finally wield it. That single change transformed the weapon from a plate and male exclusive into something the entire community could chase. But even with all of those accessibility improvements, the mythic red variant kept its aspirational status. You still had to earn that one the hard way. And speaking of earning things the hard way, the next entry requires farming an entire set of armor from scattered rare spawns across one of Legion's most annoying zones, World Defiler's Plate. Every other item on this list is one thing, one drop, one boss, one moment of luck. World Defiler's Plate is 8 separate nightmares stitched together into a single armor set, and every piece hates you individually. This complete plate set drops from rare monsters and treasure chests scattered across Argus, the Legion endgame zone. Sounds straightforward enough, but here's where it gets ugly. Each individual piece sits at roughly a 0.5% drop rate. That means any single piece can take 200 or more kills to show up, and you need all 8. That's not one lucky moment, that's 16 lucky moments from a system designed to never give you anything. But the drop rate isn't even the real problem. Different pieces drop from different rares in different zones. Commander Vakaya, Commander Andaxis, Khazadum, Talistra the Vile, and Tarek the Selector handle the Krokun drops. Mistress Ilthendra covers the Antoran Waste pieces. You can't just park yourself at one spawn point and grind. You need to know exactly which rare drops which piece, track spawn timers across multiple zones, and physically travel between them every single session. And that travel time is brutal, because Argus cannot be directly flown to. You're loading screens and flight paths deep before you even start farming. Every attempt has dead time baked into it that you simply cannot skip. Raid boss farming lets you zone in, kill, reset. Argus rare farming forces you to wander a hostile planet hoping the right mob is even up when you arrive. Here's the part that really stings. You know the collector's bounty buff that helps with other rare drop farms? It does absolutely nothing here. Zero effect on any piece of this set. There is no event, no bonus period, no weekly reset trick, and no farming optimization that meaningfully speeds this up. You are completely on your own. The set itself looks genuinely incredible. The fell corrupted plate aesthetic ties directly into the Argus storyline, and collectors who actually complete it have something almost nobody else is wearing. But the combination of per piece drop rates, scattered spawn locations, mandatory travel overhead, and zero shortcuts creates a farm that burns people out faster than almost anything else in the game. Players don't quit this farm because they lose hope. They quit because the logistics grind them into dust before the RNG even gets a chance to. But if World Defiler's Plate punishes you with logistics, the next entry punishes you with something even worse. A dungeon that refuses to give up its secrets no matter how many times you run it. Like down Vestments of the Tide Sages. On paper, this should be one of the more forgiving farms on this list. The Vestments of the Tide Sages is a full 8-piece cloth armor set that drops exclusively from the Shrine of the Storm dungeon on Mythic difficulty. Each piece sits at roughly a 1% drop rate, and unlike raid transmogs that lock you out after 1 kill per week per character, Mythic Keystone runs let you farm this dungeon as many times as you want. Unlimited attempts. No lockout. Sounds reasonable, right? Here's where it gets interesting. That unlimited farming sounds like a massive advantage until you actually do the math. Players have documented needing 300 or more full dungeon clears to complete the set. Some collectors are sitting at 400 runs and still missing a single stubborn piece. The mechanic that's supposed to make this farm accessible is the same mechanic that lets you discover exactly how brutal 1% feels when you're grinding it at scale. But the dungeon structure makes it worse. The pieces only drop from the Tide Sage Council and Lord Stormsong, the second and third bosses of the instance. You can't just sprint to the final boss and call it a day. Every single run requires you to fight through at least half the dungeon, clearing trash, dealing with mechanics, burning time. Multiply that by 300 and you're looking at a genuinely staggering time investment that rivals anything locked behind a weekly reset. The set itself is gorgeous though. The Tide Sage theming is immediately recognizable, with flowing robes and oceanic details that make it one of the most cohesive cloth transmog sets in the entire game. Cloth wearers who have it completed treat it like a badge of honor, and for good reason. You don't stumble into this set, you earn it through sheer repetitive willpower. The community debate around this one is actually fascinating. One side argues that unlimited mythic keys make this fundamentally fairer than raid-locked transmogs. You're not gated by weekly resets. You can run it 10 times a day if you want, therefore it's balanced. The other side fires back with a pretty simple counterpoint. 300 runs of a dungeon is never fair regardless of how often you can run it. The freedom to grind endlessly doesn't make the grind less miserable, it just removes the excuse to stop. And honestly, both sides have a point. The Tide Sage vestments exist in this weird middle ground where the system technically gives you every opportunity to farm them. Oh, but the reality of a 1% drop rate across 8 pieces means you're signing up for dozens of hours of the same dungeon corridors no matter what. But at least this farm only asks for your time. The next entry on this list asks for something far stranger because it doesn't even involve killing a boss. It involves digging in the dirt. Zinrock, Destroyer of Worlds. Every other item on this list asks you to kill something. A boss, a rare mob, a raid encounter. Zinrock asks you to dig holes in the dirt for 10 hours straight, and somehow that makes it one of the most frustrating farms in the entire game. Zinrock, Destroyer of Worlds, is a two-handed sword transmog obtained entirely through the archaeology profession. You need 450 archaeology skill and 150 troll archaeology fragments to solve it. But here's the part that breaks people. Hitting those thresholds doesn't guarantee anything. Zinrock is an extremely low probability result from the troll artifact pool, meaning every single solve is just another dice roll against terrible odds. You could solve your first first troll artifact and get lucky. You could solve 200 and still have nothing. The grind itself is where things get absurd. Players must solve hundreds of troll artifacts just to accumulate the fragments needed for repeated attempts, and each attempt is another spin on the same brutal RNG wheel. A documented farming guide broke down exactly what this looks like in practice. Acquiring 334 troll crates, enough for roughly 100 to 130 solves, requires clearing approximately 400 manted dig sites in Pandaria. That translates to about 10 hours of non-stop farming. 10 hours. You for a chance? But here's where it gets interesting. The modern optimized method involves reaching Exalted with the lore walkers in Pandaria, which lets you purchase troll crates directly using restored artifacts converted from manted fragments. This completely bypasses the nightmare of randomly hunting for troll dig sites scattered across multiple continents. You park yourself in Pandaria, you farm manted sites, you convert, you buy crates, you solve, it's clean, it's efficient, it's still absolutely miserable. And the math tells you everything you need to know about this farm. Using the optimized mantide conversion method, a player who invests roughly 16,000 manted fragments across 400 cleared dig sites achieves somewhere between a 22% and 90% cumulative probability of obtaining Zinrock. Read that again. Like 22% to 90%. That range is so wide, it communicates almost nothing useful to anyone trying to plan their time. You could be nearly guaranteed to get it, or you could have barely a 1 in 5 shot. Same method, same investment, completely different outcomes depending on how the RNG shakes out. The name Destroyer of Worlds is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting for a sword earned by staring at Pandaria dirt for the better part of a day. There's no boss to defeat, no dungeon to clear, no raid lockout to manage. Just you, your archaeology skill, and a profession system that most players forgot existed 3 expansions ago. But the community has largely made peace with it. Archaeology has always been understood as a long-term collectible pursuit, rather than a traditional farm, which softens the frustration somewhat. You're not grinding for a drop. You're slowly, methodically, painfully excavating your way toward a sword that may or may not exist at the bottom of your artifact pool. But if Zinrock feels like an outlier on this list, wait until you see the transmogs that require systems so obscure most players don't even know they exist. Apron to Bard. We've talked about legendary swords, demonic shoulders, and armor sets that cost more than most players will ever earn. But the rarest flex in World of Warcraft might actually be a cooking apron. The apron tabard requires completing the entire Pandaria cooking skill line, building a friendship with a cooking NPC named Nomi through daily quests, and accumulating 55 Iron Paw tokens. That process takes approximately 35 days of dedicated daily quests, meaning you're looking at 5 to 6 weeks of logging in every single day just to do your chores. No boss kills, no raid lockouts, no RNG prayers, just showing up, cooking virtual food, and turning in quests like clockwork. And here's where it gets funny. The apron tabard is essentially a blank cosmetic. It has almost zero visual impact. If you're wearing robes or any chest armor with decent coverage, you literally cannot see it. 5 weeks of daily grinding for an item that disappears underneath your outfit. It's the single largest effort to visual reward mismatch in the entire game, and that's saying something considering everything else on this list. But that's not the only transmog hiding behind a mechanic nobody uses. Party sync dungeons give access to salvaged cache of goods, lights which contain exclusive transmog items you cannot get any other way. The catch is, you have to level sync with a lower level player and complete dungeons while synced down, engaging with a feature that the vast majority of the player base doesn't even know exists. The items inside are randomized based on your class and the level you're synced to, so you can't target specific pieces. You're completely at the mercy of factors outside your control. It gets worse. Some players report that the salvage cache doesn't even drop consistently, despite supposedly being rewarded for every qualifying quest completion. The mechanic might not even work the way it's supposed to, which means you're grinding a system that's both obscure and potentially broken for transmogs that nobody will ever inspect you and recognize. Together, amongst these items represent a category of rarity that has nothing to do with boss drop rates or gold costs. It's pure daily routine, the willingness to show up every single day for weeks, or to engage with a forgotten mechanic buried 3 menus deep, all for cosmetics that the overwhelming majority of players will never notice you're wearing. In a game full of Zinrock, Destroyer of Worlds, and Titan-forged plate armor and demonic tusks that took years to farm, the rarest flex might genuinely be a cooking apron, 5 weeks of daily chores completely invisible under your robe, and absolutely nobody in your raid group will ever know you have it on. That might be the most World of Warcraft thing I've ever said. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.